nature to want to play. From Pong to Donkey Kong to Subnautica and Candy Crush, we've all button smashed an amusement device at some stage of our existence. The international game industry now encompasses 2.7 billion players. It is the biggest earning media sector globally and is set to spend $200 billion annually by 2023.
To understand this lucrative industry further, we are joined by Gisselle Rosman, Director of Locomojam and the Melbourne chapter of International Game Developers Association. Welcome.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Hey,
I'm kind of here.
Hey Giselle, thanks so much for dropping by. Since the outbreak, the game industry has grown by a phenomenal 40%. Can you brief us on why and how you got into the indie game scene?
Okay, yeah, it has grown a lot, and I think it's been a great way for us to socialise when we can't actually catch up in person. Yeah, so I've been involved in games in Melbourne since 2007. I started off as a marketing manager at one of the local games schools, and that was there was 2009 global financial crisis. Everything sort of went to pot, and I started running the IGDA in Melbourne to give us some sort of connection while we got through pretty tough times. And I'm still here now currently as Human Resources Manager at Big Ant Studios.
And what's the best advice you have for anyone wanting to succeed in the industry?
It's harder these days because your whole person is always known everywhere. So be aware of who you are and what you do online is an important thing to keep in mind, which can be difficult. I'm glad I didn't have the internet as a child. Find what you're passionate about and where your strengths lie. There's, a few different areas in games. We're not all programmers, certainly, but there is a lot of programmers. And then focus on those areas. Indie, obviously, there's a bit more, do a bit of everything. So it kind of depends where in games you want to land too.
So you kind of touched on it, but maths and physics aren't for everyone. So are they entirely necessary to be a game developer? And what subjects or courses would you recommend completing? And are there any demand in these jobs and skills?
And I'm going to try to answer it all really quickly. Okay. So as I touched on, there's a few general areas of games, and everyone thinks of a game developer as a game programmer. And game programmers are certainly game developers, but so are games artists, so are producers, so is QA or quality assurance, bug testers, so is marketing, so is social media management. There's a lot of areas that aren't necessarily meaning that I love programming and mathematics. The jobs, if you do love programming and mathematics, is a great area to get into. And yes, that part of the world, you'll get paid better in those areas a lot of the time at this moment, but it kind of depends what you're doing and what you love and where your strengths lie as to which parts you should be focusing on.
Speaking of strengths, the average esports pro player earns around 96,000 Australian dollars a year, and a high-ranking player can earn up to millions. Giselle, is it really that easy to make a career out of playing video games?
I would say no at this stage. Sorry to burst all your bubbles. And there's streaming and all sorts of other things you can do. And I feel like I'm talking to Australians at the moment, where it is a lot harder from here. If you were at a university somewhere in North America, then maybe it's more, they have esports scholarships now. And it's a growing area, certainly. But to sort of go, someone makes millions, that's like saying Britney Spears made millions of dollars in music. Like, that doesn't mean every musician's going to score really well. And, look, if not 96,000, I hadn't heard that stat before, is the average wage. That's not bad at all. But it's, it's actually not, it's not something you're going to be writing home about that much. And how many people are earning it, I think, is what you've got to look at. It's still a very niche area. So sorry to burst your bubble, and keep playing and keep streaming. And I hope that and I'm sure it will continue to grow, but I wouldn't sort of plan on that as your career path at this point in time.
Cool. That's so true. And due to a severe global shortage of semiconductors, so used in electronic chips, production of game consoles like Xbox, Nintendo Switch, and PlayStation 5, so that's all slowed down. Has this impacted the game industry at large?
Well, look, it's an impact. We're trying to get more PCs. We're growing at Big Ant, and we need to, every time we hire someone, we need to have more equipment for them. And we're honestly struggling. So it certainly is the global chip shortage. I'm one of these terribly blessed people who has a PS5, and obviously a lot of people don't. And, you know, in normal times, you would think more people would have PS5s in their hands by now. So that's obviously going to impact, you know, sales on those titles when we're getting them out, you know, and that kind of thing as well. So definitely, you know, it's affecting everything from cars and to chips in computers as well. And interestingly, I'm not sure if you'd seen this, is that I'm taking too long now, but part of it is to do with the drought in Taiwan and the amount of water it takes to make a chip. And Taiwan is the main area in the world that makes the chips, and they're in drought, so they don't have enough water to make enough chips. So there you go.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, small world, hey.
Yeah. Since the 90s, the Australian Classification Board has banned a long list of popular games from like Fallout 3, Mortal Kombat, South Park, The Stick of Truth, Disco Elysium, so many different games, to later have the decisions appealed and overturned. Why is this happening?
It can take a while for big organisations always to catch up with current trends, and I think this is like an extreme example of that. We're trying to figure out, it started potentially with the paranoia of games are bad for our children in the background, so that's not helped sort of, oh, there goes my earbud. That's not sort of helped development of good relationship there if you're coming from that kind of place to start with. I think there's a lack of understanding of the medium, and you know, it's a different sort of group of people who aren't immediately involved with this medium that are already involved in classification. So obviously we have got the R18 plus through, and there's still a lot of work to be done there in terms of, you know, updating classification across probably most genres. Obviously I'm more acquainted with games to reflect current standards and ideas.
Yeah. So, Jazz Ros, well, people hunted imposters in Among Us and tended to islands on Animal Crossing. How has the Australian game industry adapted to pandemic life?
There's been more working from home. I think a lot of indies were probably in a really good situation for that to start with, because they've been doing it for a long time. But I know, like, I'm working in a bigger studio now, and there's 60 of us, and all of a sudden we all have to work from home. One thing that's been really good sort of socially in that kind of Animal Crossing-esque way is Guy Yug Blumberg, who's an Aussie who's been moved to New York, like, you know, a year before the pandemic or something, and then got trapped there, but is doing fine now. But he started a Discord group called Games Industry Gathering, which is global and runs sort of Friday nights. When I say Friday night, it's global. So it's running for sort of 14 hours or something or other, and people had a great time there. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you there. But
that's okay.
I just wanted to mention that Unilever boosted toothpaste sales last year by over 200% in Vietnam by targeting the mum player market.
Yep. One mama admitted to spending $4,000 on in-app purchases.
Oh no.
And another was so tired from playing games they fell asleep and missed school pickup.
I promise this is going somewhere.
Yeah, that's not good. I don't condone that kind of behaviour.
The point of all this is that the Australian female players percentage has dramatically increased, while Friends ended in 2004. Sorry, can I go from the top of that quote? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a weird thing, this one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, ever since the sorry, there is a point to this because as soon as Friends ended in 2004, the percentage of Australian female players actually dramatically increased. Giselle, is this a conspiracy, coincidence, or correlation?
I have no idea. That was a very fascinating factoid you thrown out there. Whether there's, I would be interested to see what games were released around that time, and whether there was starting to have a recognition of the fact that it's not just dude bros that want to play video games. So I don't know that it was Friends, but maybe Rachel was big into games.
Speaking of, Giselle, what are your thoughts on the portrayal of women in games?
There's still vast rooms for improvement. It's getting better. I think there's still a strong tendency to go the easy option of let's go for the core. Yeah, boys, look at that option. But I think it's becoming less popular, and I think that diversity in look is getting better in games. Dare I say it?
Yeah, no, you're actually.
Oh, there goes all my ears.
Sorry, that's okay. No, you're actually spot on because we found out that 7 in 10 adult gamers think there is actually a need to portray a greater range of sexual orientations and people with disability in games and in gaming titles as well.
Exactly, and that's been a focus. Like, I know games has, and rightfully so, for the most part, a terrible reputation for lack of diversity. But it's been very self-aware of that for a long time. Sometimes for better and worse, but mostly, most people are really trying to make the effort to increase diversity in games across the board.
Sorry, speaking of making the effort, what can we actually do to improve representation?
Do you mean, sorry, this is where there's definitions of what you mean by representation. Do you mean representation in the games?
Yeah, as in...
To start with, that will be helped by having representation in the studios. So increasing the diverse viewpoints that are in the studios so that it's not just the majority of cis-het dudes, then you're going to get the inputs coming so that the outputs will be impacted by them. So I think, like that's a great spot, and particularly as somebody sort of looking at it from a game development perspective. Increasing the diversity of your team is going to increase the diversity of your outputs. But even if you, that's not to say, there's still going to be, it's okay, cis-het dudes, there's still going to be a lot of you there, and we love you, and that's fine. But be aware that you're building games for more than people just yourselves.
Absolutely.
And have a think about that. And how can I increase my audience? Well, 10% of the population is colourblind. Let me check what my game looks like for colourblindness. So, it's always about increasing. It's interesting because I've started talking too much. You can cut this whenever you like.
I was just gonna. Sorry. I mean, it really does sound like there's a lot of stuff to get done. Speaking of getting stuff done, you're renowned for getting stuff done. What's new on the horizon for you?
I know I have got new things finally, although I'm so out of practice after this last year of hibernating. But we have got which game jam am I talking about? Locomojam, as we mentioned. In 2019, it ran from Brisbane to Melbourne with a bunch of ragtag game developers who made video games on 2 trains and an overnight stay in Sydney. We're doing it again now that hopefully we're doing it again.
Cross my fingers for you.
Open, and everything will be fine, and we will all be vaccinated by October. And we're coming from, because of rail works in Queensland, I'm so sorry, Brisbane, but we're actually starting from Coffs Harbour this year. So that's an exciting adventure in itself. So everyone come to Coffs Harbour so then you can come to Melbourne whilst making games and get there just in time for Games Week and GCAT and then show off your games at PAX. It'll be great fun.
Amazing. So, Giselle, it's been an absolute blast chatting. We hope to see you online sometime soon. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
Pleasure. Have a great one, everybody.
Bye.